Chapter 1, Dust on Main Street. The town of Dry Creek lay beneath a hard sun, its main street little more than packed dirt with wagon ruts and the heavy smell of horses. Heat shimmered in waves off the clapboard buildings, and every bootstep raised a little puff of dust that clung to the air like smoke from a dying fire. The old saloon door swung lazily, letting out bursts of fiddle music, laughter, and the sharp clink of glass on glass before closing again with a hollow creak. Caleb Morgan guided his sorrel gelding down the street, reins loose in his hand, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He rode like a man who had nowhere to be, yet nowhere else to go. His face, lined with sun and sorrow, looked carved from the same stone as the cliffs that framed the desert beyond. A revolver rested heavy on his hip, but it was a weight in his chest that dragged him down far more than any iron. It had been 3 years since fever took his boy, 3 years of silence at the ranch, save for the lowing of cattle and the lonely groan of wind across the prairie. He had learned to live with that silence, like a scar that no longer bled but never healed. A thin voice stopped him. "Do you also cry from hunger?" Caleb's head turned sharply. By the porch of the mercantile sat a girl, barefoot and ragged, her dress little more than torn calico patched with dirt. She couldn't have been more than 14, maybe 15, but her eyes, gray and wide, sunken from want, held an age that unsettled him. She didn't reach for him like the other beggars in town did. She just sat there, knees drawn up, arms hugging her thin frame, watching him as though she were asking something she already knew the answer to. Caleb reined his horse in. The animal snorted, hooves scraping the dirt. Around them, townsfolk carried on, women balancing baskets, men in dusters striding toward the saloon. But a quiet seemed to settle in that little stretch of street, like the world was waiting for his reply. He shifted in the saddle. "What did you say?" The girl lifted her chin, defiance flickering under the hunger. "I asked if you cry from hunger, too. 'Cause sometimes it hurts so bad it feels like you could." Her words cut deeper than he expected. Caleb opened his mouth, then shut it again. The fiddle in the saloon screeched a high note, followed by raucous laughter, and somewhere down the road a dog barked at nothing. Life went on, but he stayed staring at the girl, caught in her unblinking gaze. Finally, he swung a leg over and dropped to the ground, his spurs giving a faint jingle. Dust swirled around his boots as he stepped closer. "How long you been sitting out here?" "Since morning," she answered. Her voice was steady, but her fingers clenched the hem of her dress. "And where's your folks?" A shadow crossed her face, and she looked away. "Gone." Nothing more. Caleb exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't want this. Didn't want the pull of pity. He had buried enough pain. Yet here she was, sitting in the dirt like some ghost sent to remind him of everything he had lost. Inside the mercantile, the bell over the door jingled. A man walked out carrying a sack of flour, glancing at the girl before looking away quickly, as if she were nothing but another stray dog on the street. Caleb's jaw tightened. He crouched down at her level, his knees popping like gunshots. "You got a name, girl?" "Mary." "Well, Mary," he scratched at the stubble along his jaw, searching for words. "Come on inside. Get yourself something to eat." Her eyes widened a fraction, suspicion fighting with hunger. "Why?" Caleb's lips twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. "Reckon a man don't need a reason to keep another soul from starving." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she uncurled her arms and stood, her frame trembling like a colt on unsteady legs. Caleb held the mercantile door open, and the two stepped into the cool dimness. Behind them, the street carried on, dust swirling, saloon music rising, the sun beating down mercilessly. Unaware that something had shifted, as quiet and dangerous as the first roll of thunder on a parched horizon. Chapter 2, Bread and Silence. The mercantile smelled of flour dust dry beans, and leather oil. Shafts of sunlight slanted to front windows, cutting across shelves stacked with bolts of cloth, jars of penny candy, and rough sacks of grain. The bell over the door still quivered from their entry. Mary hesitated just inside, bare toes curling against the wooden floorboards. She looked as though stepping into the space was trespass, like the walls might close in and toss her back out where she belonged, on the dirt. Caleb ignored the eyes of the shopkeeper, old Mr. Walker, who peered at the girl with a wrinkled scowl. "She with you, Morgan?" he asked, voice sharp with suspicion. Caleb kept his gaze steady. "She is." Walker grunted, lips tightening, but he said no more. The clink of coins on the counter soon smoothed the man's concerns. Caleb turned back to Mary. "Pick something. Bread. Maybe jerky." She stared at the shelves like she'd never seen so much food in her life. Her hands twitched at her sides, but she didn't move. "Well," Caleb prompted, his tone gruff. Mary swallowed, eyes darting to him, then to the shopkeeper, then back again. I don't know what I can take." "Anything I pay for," Caleb said. "Go on." At last, she stepped forward, careful as though the boards might snap beneath her. She lifted a loaf of bread, wrapped in brown paper, and clutched it to her chest. Caleb added a wedge of cheese, a sack of beans, and a strip of dried venison to the counter. Coins passed hands, and soon they were outside again, the door jingling shut behind them. Mary tore into the bread the moment they reached the hitching post. She ate with the desperation of someone who didn't know if tomorrow would ever bring another bite. Crumbs dotted her cheeks, and she barely stopped to breathe. Caleb leaned against his horse, arms folded, watching her in silence. "Slow down," he muttered after a while. "You'll make yourself sick." She froze, guilt flickering across her face, then lowered the bread like a child caught stealing. "Sorry." Caleb shook his head. "Ain't nothing to be sorry for." The street bustled around them. Wagons creaked. Men hollered about cattle prices. A dog nosed through the dust. Yet the two of them stood in a bubble of quiet. Caleb saw the way her shoulders hunched as though bracing for a blow, the way her eyes stayed low, never daring to meet his. "Where were you headed?" he asked at length. She shrugged, chewing slower now. "Nowhere. Just away." "From what?" Her lips pressed tight. She didn't answer. Caleb studied her a moment longer, then sighed, pulling himself up into the saddle. He extended a hand downward. "Come on." She blinked at him. "Where?" "My ranch. You'll eat proper there." She hesitated, bread still clutched in one hand. "Why me?" "Don't rightly know," Caleb said, voice low. "Maybe I don't like seeing bones where a girl's cheeks ought to be." For a heartbeat she didn't move, tore between flight and trust. Then, slowly, she put her small hand in his callous one, and he hoisted her up to ride behind him. Her arms circled his waist gingerly, like she was afraid he'd shake her off. They left Dry Creek in a cloud of dust. Behind them the saloon doors flapped, laughter spilling into the street, but ahead stretched open prairie, miles of golden grass bending under a restless wind. Mary's head tilted to the side, resting lightly against Caleb's back as the gelding trotted steady. He felt a faint pressure and stiffened, and used another soul leaning on him. The last person who had sat behind him like this had been his boy, all eager questions and wide smiles. That memory stabbed sharp, but the warmth of the girl's touch dulled the edge, if only slightly. The sun bled toward the horizon, painting the land in fire. Coyotes yipped in the distance, lonely calls echoing through the vastness. Caleb said nothing. Mary said nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty, though it was heavy, fragile, like the air before a storm. When the ranch house finally came into view, a weathered structure crouched against the rolling hills. Mary lifted her head, eyes wide. "That's yours." Caleb nodded. It's so big. He gave a short grunt. Big. Maybe empty, too. Her gaze lingered on him, curious, but she didn't press. Instead, she hugged the bread tighter to her chest, as though it were treasure. As they rode through the ranch gate, the wind caught her words, soft but certain. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Caleb kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, but something in his chest shifted at the sound. He hadn't heard gratitude spoken to him in years. And though the silence still stretched between them, it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something just beginning to take root. Chapter 3, Shadows of the Past. The first night at the Morgan Ranch was colder than Mary expected. The prairie wind cut sharp once the sun fell, whistling through cracks in the old boards. She curled under a patchwork quilt Caleb had tossed on the narrow bunk, her body still buzzing from food, her mind restless as a coyote circling in the dark. At dawn, the rooster's crows startled her awake. She sat up quickly, afraid she might have overslept, afraid he'd send her away for being lazy. Outside, she heard the low bellow of cattle and the steady thud of boots on dirt. Caleb was already at work. She found him in the yard, hauling buckets of water from the pump. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, muscles moving like coiled rope. He gave her a brief glance, then nodded toward the barn. Chores don't do themselves. Feed's in the bin. Horses will tell you if you do it wrong. Mary scrambled to obey, eager to prove herself useful. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and animals, a warm contrast to the chill outside. She carried a bucket too big for her thin arms, spilling grain across the floor. The horses nickered impatiently, hooves striking the stalls. She whispered apologies, fumbling to get the feed right. When she bent to sweep the mess, her broom struck something half-buried under a tarp in the corner. Curious, she pulled the cloth aside. Beneath the dust lay a small wooden horse, whittled by hand, its edges smoothed by years of touch. It wasn't perfect, one leg shorter, the head slightly crooked, but it radiated a kind of love no store-bought toy could carry. Mary reached out, her fingers brushing the wood. Don't. The voice was harsh enough to make her jump. Caleb stood in the doorway, shadows cutting across his face. His eyes weren't angry, not exactly, but they were hard, haunted. I didn't mean, Mary stammered, clutching the toy to her chest as if it might explain itself. He strode forward, taking it gently but firmly from her hands. His thumb traced the carved mane with a tenderness that betrayed the storm beneath his rough exterior. That ain't for touching. Mary swallowed. It's beautiful. Did you make it? Caleb's jaw clenched. For a moment he said nothing, only staring at the little horse, as though it were the last bridge to something long gone. Finally he answered, voice low, for my boy. The barn fell silent save for the restless shifting of hooves. Mary's breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but the grief in his eyes warned her back. He liked to ride the fence with me, Caleb went on, words dragging out like stones pulled from the earth. Too small to rope, but he'd sit tall in the saddle. Thought the whole world belonged to him. His hand closed around the toy. Fever took him before he saw 12. The finality in his tone struck harder than any slap. Mary lowered her gaze, her own heart aching. She knew loss too well, the kind that left holes no word to fill. I'm sorry, she whispered. Caleb turned from her, setting the toy back on the shelf with careful reverence. Don't need your pity. It's not pity, she said quickly, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. I just know what it's like. To lose everyone. That made him pause. He looked back at her, really looked, as though trying to see past her frail body and dirt-streaked face to the truth inside. Something softened in his expression, but it vanished just as fast. Finish the feed, he said gruffly, moving toward the door. I'll check the fence line." When he was gone, Mary let out a shaky breath. She turned back to the little horse, now half hidden under its tarp once more. Slowly, reverently, she knelt beside it, her small hands folded, and she whispered, almost too soft for the horses to hear, "Lord, let his boy rest easy, and if you can let Mr. Morgan smile again someday." The barn swallowed her words, the scent of hay thick in the air. For the first time since arriving, Mary felt she had touched something deeper than hunger or fear, something fragile, like hope hidden under dust. Chapter 4. Trouble at the Saloon. Dry Creek came alive in the evenings. The heat of the day bled off into a copper-red sunset, and the town gathered where the light burned longest, around the saloon. Music spilled through swinging doors, fill strings sharp and bright, mixing with rowdy laughter, the slam of poker chips, and the clink of whiskey glasses. Spurs clattered on the boardwalk, boots thudded on creaking planks, and the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and spilled ale. Mary had never been inside such a place. Caleb had gone to settle accounts at the blacksmith, and she, holding a few coins in her palm, was sent to fetch flour from the store. She finished the errand, but as she walked past the saloon, the sound of music tugged her closer. For just a moment she lingered, peeking in at the swirl of skirts, the shimmer of lamplight on polished boots, the raucous card tables. "Hey there, little bird." The voice came from behind. She spun around to see a tall ranch hand leaning against a post, whiskey breath heavy in the cooling air. His hat was pushed back, revealing a sneer that didn't reach his eyes. He was one of the Morgan boys' rivals from the cattle drives, a man who had watched Caleb with bitterness for years. Mary clutched the sack of flour tighter. "I need to get back." He stepped forward, blocking her path. "Don't rush. Ain't often we get strays in town. Folks say you're living out at Morgan's place. That true?" Her throat tightened. She nodded, wishing Caleb would appear. The man chuckled darkly. "Figures. He's always been soft where it don't matter. Maybe I ought to see what's so special about you." His hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Let go!" she gasped, struggling, but his grip only tightened. The saloon chatter quieted slightly as heads turned, curiosity rising. Some men smirked, others looked away, not willing to interfere. "Leave me alone." Her words cut off as the man yanked her closer, but before she could cry out, a shadow fell over them. Caleb. His hand closed around the ranch hand's collar and wrenched him backward, breaking his grip on Mary. The force sent the drunk stumbling into a post, hat tumbling to the dirt. Caleb's voice came low, dangerous, the kind that froze a man's blood. "You touch her again, I'll break your hand clean off." The ranch hand staggered upright, face red, eyes narrowing. "She's just a beggar girl, Morgan. Ain't your blood. You gonna draw iron over trash." A hush swept through the saloon porch. Cards stilled, glasses froze midair. The faint squeak of a fiddle string hung in the silence. Caleb didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his boot heels grinding into the dirt, his revolver heavy at his side. "Try me?" The ranch hand's gaze flicked to the pistol, then back to Caleb's steel-hard eyes. For a tense heartbeat, it seemed the man might go for his own gun. Mary held her breath, the sack of flour slipping from her hands into the dust. Then the drunk spat on the ground and backed away, muttering curses under his breath. "Ain't worth the trouble. You'll regret it, Morgan. Mark me." He disappeared into the saloon, swallowed by the noise and lamplight. The spell broke. Conversations resumed in low tones, but the air carried a new weight, respect mixed with wariness. Caleb bent to pick up the flour, dusting it off before handing it back to Mary. His hand lingered a moment on hers, steadying her trembling fingers. "You all right?" She nodded quickly, though her eyes shimmered with fear. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be stopped here. Caleb's expression softened just a fraction. Ain't your fault. World's full of men like him. My job's making sure they don't get their way. For the first time, she looked up at him. Not with hunger, not with suspicion, but with something warmer, fragile as a flame shielded from a wind. Thank you. The word struck him like a bullet to the heart. It had been years since anyone had spoken it to him, and meant it. He cleared his throat, adjusting his hat. Come on, let's head back. They walked down the boardwalk together, the saloon music fading behind them, the prairie night stretching wide and star-swept ahead. Caleb's shadow fell long across the dirt, Mary's smaller one beside it. Two shapes moving side by side, bound now by something neither of them yet knew how to name. Chapter 5. Fire on the Horizon. The prairie evening was quiet, too quiet. Caleb leaned against the fence rail, watching the sky bleed crimson into purple as the sun sank low. The air smelled of sagebrush and dry earth. In the distance, coyotes yipped their lonely chorus, and the cattle shifted restlessly. He felt Mary's presence before he saw her, a soft rustle of skirts on the porch. She stood there, hugging her arms against the cooling air, staring at the horizon as though it might hold answers. You get them dishes done? Caleb asked, his tone even. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice was small but steady. I put the rest of the bread away, too. He nodded, eyes fixed on the land. He didn't say it, but her presence filled the silence in a way that was no longer unwelcome. Then came the smell, smoke. Sharp, bitter, too close. Caleb stiffened, turning toward the barn. Thin wisps curled upward, glowing orange at the edges. His gut dropped. Mary inside. But she didn't move. Her eyes widened, fixed on the flicker of fire dancing along the hay loft window. Caleb was already running. He kicked the barn doors wide, the hinges screeching, smoke pouring out thick as tar. Inside, horses screamed and stamped in panic, ropes straining against posts. The fire crackled up the walls, sparks raining down like devil's confetti. Get water! Caleb barked, grabbing the nearest rope and cutting a horse free. The gelding bolted into the yard, eyes wild. Mary, coughing, dragged a bucket from the pump, sloshing half of it as she ran. She threw the water uselessly at the flames, but her determination didn't waver. Her thin body was racked with smoke, yet she stumbled back for another. Mary, stay out! Caleb roared, hauling another horse toward the door. His throat burned, eyes stung, but he kept moving. He couldn't lose them. Not the animals, not her. But Mary ignored him. She staggered to the trough, filling another bucket, lips trembling as she dragged it forward. By the time she reached him, her knees buckled and the bucket spilled. Caleb cursed under his breath, scooping her into his arms. She was light as a sack of feathers, coughing hard, face streaked with soot. Fool girl, he muttered, though his voice broke around the edges. He carried her outside, laying her on the grass, then dashed back in for the last horse. Moments later he stumbled out, dragging the terrified animal into the open. The barn roared behind him, flames climbing high, turning the night into a demon sunrise. They both fell into the dirt, heaving for air. Caleb lay on his back, chest burning, watching sparks drift up into the endless sky. Mary turned her head toward him, her eyes red-rimmed but alive. I'm sorry, she rasped. He rolled onto an elbow, scowling at her. Sorry? You near got yourself killed. I couldn't just stand there, she whispered, coughing. Her small hand pressed her chest. If you'd gone alone, you might not be come back out. Her words struck him harder than the smoke. For years he had lived as though his life meant nothing, as though the grave had already half claimed him. Yet here was this half-starved girl, trembling in the grass, telling him she cared whether he lived or died. His jaw worked, but no words came. They lay in silence, listening to the barn groan and collapse, timbers falling in a shower of sparks. The fire hissed as it devoured what little was left. In the chaos, the night had grown strange. Soft wind carrying the smell of ash, the sky thick with smoke yet pricked with stubborn stars. Mary shifted closer, her thin shoulder brushing his. Her voice came soft, almost a prayer. When I say grace, I ask God to let you smile again someday. Caleb turned his head sharply, staring at her. She wasn't looking at him, only at the flames, her soot-streaked face illuminated by their glow. Something twisted in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He swallowed hard, throat tight. He wanted to tell her that smiling was something he'd buried with his boy, but the words died before they left his lips. Instead, he reached over, adjusting the quilt she dragged outside with her, tucking it around her thin frame. "Rest," he muttered. "You've done enough." She blinked at him, surprise flickering in her gaze, but then she nodded, curling into the blanket. Caleb sat watch as the last embers of the barn smoldered. For the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. Chapter 6. The Gunman Returns. Dawn came pale and cold, spilling gray light across the ranch. The smoke from the burned barn still lingered, clinging low over the yard like a ghost unwilling to leave. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the land stretch endless and quiet, his mind replaying the fire over and over. Mary emerged from the house, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, her face smudged with soot she hadn't managed to wash clean. She looked small, fragile, but her eyes carried something fierce now. "You didn't close your eyes all night," she said softly. Caleb gave a grunt. Sleep don't come easy when enemies set fire to your livelihood. His jaw clenched. That wasn't no accident. That was a message. Mary opened her mouth to answer, but her words died. Out beyond the fence line, 3 riders appeared, dark silhouettes against the rising sun. The steady beat of hooves carried on the still air, deliberate and heavy. Caleb rose slowly, rifle lifting to his shoulder. "Get inside, Mary." She froze. "Who are they?" "Trouble," he muttered. "Now go." But she didn't move. The riders came into view, dust swirling around their horses' legs. At their lead was a ranch hand from the saloon, his smirk twisted and mean. 2 others flanked him, pistols hanging loose at their sides, their faces shaded by wide-brimmed hats. Well, the lead man drawled as they reined at the yard. "Morgan, thought we'd stop by after last night's fireworks." His eyes shifted toward Mary, lingering too long. "Looks like your beggar girl survived." "Shame." Caleb stepped off the porch, boots crunching the dirt, rifle steady. His voice was cold iron. "You set that fire." The man chuckled. Maybe not. Ain't no court out here gonna care. But I figure you've been riding high long enough. Time somebody knocked you down." His hand twitched toward his revolver. Caleb tightened his grip, every muscle taut. The air grew thick, tense, the world narrowing to the space between them. "Mary," Caleb said, his voice sharp but calm, never looking away from the men. "Barn. Now." This time, she obeyed. She ran, skirts brushing dust, ducking inside the half-collapsed building where only smoldering timbers remained. She crouched low, heart pounding, peering through a crack in the wall. The leader spat in the dirt. "Last chance, Morgan." Hand over the girl. "You keep playing hero, you won't live to see sundown." Caleb's voice cut like steel. "You'll have to go through me." The first shot rang out like thunder. Caleb fired before the man's revolver cleared leather, the crack echoing across the prairie. The outlaw jerked back, bullet grazing his shoulder, and chaos erupted. Gunfire split the air. Horses screamed and reared. Caleb ducked behind the water trough, returning fire with calm precision. Bullets splintered the porch posts, sending chips flying. The outlaws spread out, circling like wolves. Mary pressed her hand to her ears, but the sounds bled through. Gunshots, curses, the hiss of bullets striking wood. Then, through the smoke and fear, she saw one outlaw creeping toward the barn, pistol drawn, eyes sharp, her breath caught. If he reached Caleb from behind, her gaze fell on a pitchfork leaning against the charred wall. She grabbed it, hands shaking, and stepped into the open just as the man closed in. With a desperate cry, she drove the pitchfork forward, catching him off guard. The tine struck his arm, his gun clattering to the dirt. He roared in pain, spinning on her. "Mary!" Caleb's voice thundered. He fired. The outlaw dropped before he could touch her. For a heartbeat, the yard was still. Then the last gunman, seeing his partner fall, fled, spurring his horse hard across the plain. The leader staggered after him, clutching his bleeding shoulder, spitting curses that trailed off into the distance. Silence settled, broken only by the ragged breathing of man and girl. Smoke curled from the wrecked barn, drifting up into the pale morning sky. Caleb strode to Mary, seizing her shoulders. "What in God's name were you thinking?" His voice was raw, trembling with fury, but beneath it, fear. Tears streaked down her soot-stained cheeks. "He was going to kill you," she whispered. "I couldn't just sit there." Caleb's chest heaved. He stared at her, this thin, stubborn girl who had stood her ground when grown men fled. Slowly, his hands loosened on her shoulders. His voice dropped, heavy with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "You saved my life." Mary met his gaze, trembling. "Then we're even." He let out a long breath, pulling her into his chest despite himself. She was shaking, but alive, pressed against him like the daughter he'd lost and the hope he thought buried forever. As the prairie wind swept away the smoke, Caleb Morgan realized the ranch wasn't empty anymore. Chapter 7, A Place to Belong. The ranch was quiet again. Too quiet. The gunfire had faded hours ago, leaving only echoes in Caleb's ears. He sat at the kitchen table, shirt torn, blood seeping through a bandage at his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. His revolver lay on the table beside a chipped lantern, its weight no comfort now. Outside, the prairie wind sighed through the broken board of the barn, carrying the smell of char and ash. Mary moved about the small kitchen with careful steps. She was barefoot, her dress streaked with smoke and dirt, but she carried herself with a strange calm as she fetched a bowl of water, wrung out a rag, and came to his side. "Hold still," she whispered. Caleb grunted but didn't resist. She pressed the damp cloth to his wound, and he flinched, jaw tightening. Her small hands trembled, but she steadied herself, cleaning the blood away with quiet determination. "You don't have to fuss," he muttered. Mary's gray eyes lifted to meet his, and for once there was no fear in them, only resolve. "Yes, I do. You saved me. I saved you. That makes us something, don't it?" Caleb's chest tightened. He looked away, staring at the lantern's flickering flame. He'd lived years locked behind walls of silence, letting no one close, not since the fever took his boy. And now this ragged slip of a girl had torn through those walls without even knowing it. "You should have run," he said at last, voice low. "When bullets started flying, you should have hid." Her fingers stilled, but she didn't pull away. "If I'd run, you'd be dead." The truth in her words hit him harder than the slug that tore his flesh. He turned back to her slowly. She looked so young, hair tangled, face smudged, yet in her eyes burned the fire of someone who had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. For a long time neither spoke. The lantern hissed softly, shadows shifting on the log walls. Outside, A lone coyote cried in the distance, a sound both mournful and proud. Finally, Caleb reached up, covering her small hand with his rough one. "You don't belong out there any more," he said, his voice thick, weighted with something fragile. "Not in the dust. Begging scraps. You've got a place here now, if you'll have it." Mary's lips parted, her breath catching. "A place." He nodded. "This ranch. With me. Won't be easy. Works hard. Land harsher. But you'll eat. You'll sleep under a roof. You'll belong." For a heartbeat she just stared, as though afraid it was only smoke and would vanish if she reached for it. Then, slowly, her face cracked into the smallest smile he had ever seen on her, a smile trembling on the edge of tears. "I don't want to be anywhere else," she whispered. The words broke something in him. Caleb closed his eyes, pressing his hand to his face, and for the first time in years the tears came. They weren't loud or bitter, but quiet, steady, tears that carried both grief and release. Mary didn't speak. She only leaned against him, small shoulder pressing into his side, her head resting against his chest. He let her, his arm wrapping around her almost without thought. It felt natural, like holding on to something that had been missing all along. The lantern burned low, shadows stretching across the walls like long-forgotten memories. Caleb breathed in the scent of smoke, of earth, of the girl who walked into his life asking if he cried from hunger. He realized then that hunger wasn't just for food. It was for belonging, for family, for hope. And somehow, in the dust and danger of the frontier, they had found it in each other. As the night deepened and the coyotes sang their lonesome hymn, Caleb Morgan allowed himself something he hadn't felt in years. He let himself believe that tomorrow might bring more than loss. Tomorrow he might even smile. Chapter 8. A New Dawn on the Prairie. The sun rose golden over the plains, spilling light across the scorched skeleton of the barn and the weathered boards of the ranch house. For the first time in years, Caleb Morgan stood on his porch and felt the warmth of it on his face without turning away. The prairie was still vast and lonesome, but something had shifted inside him, like a door long shut had creaked open. Behind him, Mary emerged, clutching a newly mended shawl around her shoulders. Her hair had been brushed, though it still curled wild in places. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in spirit. Her chin lifted with quiet pride. Caleb gave her a nod. "Mount up. We're going to town." Her gray eyes widened. "Together?" "Together," he said simply. Soon they rode side by side down the dirt road. Mary perched behind him on the gelding. Dust swirled beneath the horse's hooves, sunlight catching it like smoke in the air. The land stretched wide, endless, but for the first time in a long while Caleb didn't feel lost in it. When they reached Dry Creek, townsfolk paused. Men leaned against posts. Women paused with baskets in their arms. And the chatter of the street softened into murmurs. All eyes turned to the pair, Caleb, the loner rancher who had kept his shadows for years, and Mary, the beggar girl who now sat tall on his horse, her shawl bright against the dust. They dismounted by the general store. Mary slid down first, her feet landing light on the boardwalk. She held her head high, no longer shrinking from curious eyes. Caleb followed, his presence as solid as an oak, daring anyone to speak against her. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but there was no cruelty this time. Only curiosity, even respect. Mr. Walker, the shopkeeper who once scowled at Mary, gave a curt nod before returning to his counter. Outside the saloon, a car dealer tipped his hat. The town had seen the smoke of the fire, heard the shots at dawn. Word had spread that Morgan and the girl had stood their ground. Caleb bought supplies, flour, nails, and enough lumber to start a new barn. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. Mary carried smaller bundles with pride, her thin arms steady, her back straight. When their business was done, Caleb led her not homeward, but up the rise just beyond the churchyard. The grass grew tall there, bending in the wind, and a single wooden cross leaned against the sky, weathered but cared for, his wife's grave. Mary slowed, her steps respectful. She glanced at him, uncertain, but he gave a nod. Together, they approached. Caleb knelt in the dust, brushing dry grass from the marker. For a long time he said nothing, his rough hands resting on his knees, the silence heavy but not empty. At last, his voice came, low and steady. "It's been a long while since I came, Martha. Too long. I thought I was done. Thought the land took everything from me. But it seems I was wrong." He glanced at Mary, who stood quiet beside him, shawl fluttering in the prairie breeze. "This here's Mary. She don't got no kin left, but she's ours now." His voice faltered, and he cleared his throat. "If you're watching, I reckon you'll understand." Mary's hand slipped into his, small, warm, trembling just a little. He didn't pull away. Instead, he closed his calloused fingers around hers, grounding them both. The prairie wind swept across the hill, carrying with it the distant sound of church bells and the faint lowing of cattle. Caleb felt lighter somehow, as if the weight he had carried for years had finally eased enough to breathe. He rose, dusting off his hat, and looked down at Mary. "Come on, girl. Got work to do." She smiled softly, and for the first time, Caleb let the corner of his own mouth lift in return. Not a full smile. He wasn't ready for that, but enough to promise it would come. Together they mounted the horse once more, riding out of town as the sun climbed higher, burning the sky with streaks of gold. Dust rose behind them, glowing in the light, and the vast prairie open ahead, endless, dangerous, beautiful. Two riders now, not one, a man and a girl, carrying sorrow and hope, bound not by blood but by something just as strong. A new dawn on the prairie. The prairie burned with the colors of sunset, amber, crimson, and gold spilling across the wide sky. Caleb Morgan reined in his horse at the crest of the ridge, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint sound of saloon music drifting from Dry Creek below. Beside him rode Mary, her shawl tucked tight, her posture proud and steady. The ranch lay behind them, smoke from the rebuilt barn curling gently into the air, no longer a scar but a promise. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but they no longer ruled him. Mary turned, her gray eyes catching the fire of the dying sun. "Do you still cry from hunger?" she asked softly, echoing the words she had spoken the first day they met. Caleb's throat tightened. He reached over, rough hand covering hers on the reins. "Not anymore," he said. "I've got something worth living for again." The wind swept around them, carrying his words into the open land. For the first time in years, he smiled, a small weathered thing, but real. Mary leaned her head against his arm, and together they looked out at the horizon. "Then let's go home," she whispered. The horses moved forward in unison, their shadows stretching long across the plains. The sun dipped low, and the two riders rode on, no longer haunted by hunger or grief, but bound by a new beginning beneath the endless western sky.